In 2019, Who Will Let the Dogs Out first visited Franklin County Animal Control Shelter in Winchester, Tennessee. The conditions at the shelter were some of the worst we had seen. Dogs in tiny concrete kennels without enough room to turn around, with no option but to stand in their own feces. There was very little ventilation, and the only thing they could see were the dogs in the kennels across from them. There were no volunteers coming to work with them because the county utilized inmates to do the shelter work. The dogs had no human contact except briefly once a day when they were moved so their kennel could be cleaned. And those were the good accommodations. The dogs who lived outside had slightly larger kennels, but the space was taken up by igloo dog houses, their only shelter from the weather, which likely became infernos inside in the blazing sun. It was almost 100 degrees on the fall day that we visited. The budget of the shelter covers only food, rabies vaccine, and distemper vaccines, and that's a new practice following a recent lethal distemper outbreak. None of the dogs were dewormed or treated for fleas or minor medical needs. We met Heather, the ACO, who struggled to save as many lives as possible. She told us that the week before they'd had to euthanize 12 dogs and 50 cats. There were very few local adoptions, and the only real chance the dogs had was if a rescue pulled them. Heather took their pictures with her small digital camera and at night uploaded them on her home computer and shared the dogs' pictures with rescue contacts around the country in the hopes that someone would pull the dogs. If a rescue chose one of her dogs, she would get a vet appointment for the dog, drive it to its appointment, and pay out of her own pocket mostly, but sometimes the receiving rescue paid the vet bill, to have the dog spayed and neutered, given a heartworm test and a health certificate, and then she would drive the dog to meet a transport. We left the shelter disheartened, wondering how we could help. Heather was doing so much and getting nowhere. Winchester is a nice suburb, not impoverished like so much of rural Tennessee. How could they stand for this kind of shelter? How could they let so many dogs suffer and die in their care? When we got home, I called another nearby shelter in Winchester. Animal Harbor is a private, nonprofit shelter where dogs do not die for lack of space. I spoke with Emily, the director, and asked if they could help Franklin. She said they did try to help Franklin on occasion, but they had their hands full. She said something else. Most people in the area don't know what happens at the shelter. That resonated with me because I have always believed the problem doesn't exist because people don't care, but because they don't know. It's why we started Who Will Let the Dogs Out. This is a dog-loving nation, and I didn't think Winchester was any different. Normally, after our shelter visits, I write a post explaining the situation, laying out the facts, pointing out the great work the staff is doing. I always take the side of the shelter. I know they are given an impossible job and not enough resources to do it. I want to highlight how hard it is and how hard they are working. I know that shaming a community doesn't inspire people to action. But this seemed different. This was not a place that couldn't afford to do better or had a shelter staff that wasn't even trying. What they needed was a little community investment, and my conversation with Emily made it clear that the community didn't know they could help. I wrote a scathing post about the situation at the Franklin County shelter, and I did one thing I'd never done. I first shared that post with Heather. I didn't want to write anything that might jeopardize her position at the shelter. A lot of dogs were dying there, but without her, all of the dogs would die there. Heather told me that the post might get in a little trouble, but it was the truth, and she wanted me to put it out there the way it was. So I did. And nothing happened. Or so I thought. Flash forward to fall of 2021. We returned to Franklin, and it wasn't much better. There were a few rays of hope. The much-needed overhang had finally been installed to protect the outside dogs from the blazing sun. And the Bissell Foundation was helping them with supplies and food and had paid for new cat condos. But the dogs were still living in those awful kennels, never getting any kind of enrichment or attention, and only getting out live through rescue. Heather was still working herself to the bone trying to save animals. On that same trip, we visited Animal Harbor and met many of the staff. It is a wonderful place with large kennels, outside playtime for the dogs, volunteers that walk and play with them, even a trainer on staff to work with the dogs. The building is bright and cheerful. I'm sure most people in Winchester went to Animal Harbor and not the animal control shelter when they were looking for a dog. The dogs there were healthier, happier, and the place is a wonderful resource for its community. But it operates on donations, not county money. Clearly, people in the community wanted a shelter like this one. So why was Franklin Animal Control still such an awful place? I wrote about both situations this time, and we moved on, believing that once again we couldn't do more for them. But those visits and the words I wrote and pictures Nancy took had inspired a few hearts. The next message we got came from Franklin about 10 months later. It was from Emily at Animal Harbor. She wrote, I am on the agenda to speak to the County Finance Committee about the deplorable conditions at our county-run shelter. Please wish me luck. A few concerned citizens are really advocating for a new shelter. We have several people involved, and there has been more talk in the political circles than ever before. I wished her luck and asked her to let me know what happened. And then I got another message from Becky, another Winchester resident. Because of your reports and reviews of Franklin County, Tennessee, we have a small group that is organized to improve the lives of the animals who need the service of animal control. We are hoping for the best. We have just recently passed our first hurdle to build a new shelter. We have a donor giving a match of $500,000 if our county agrees to approve an additional $500,000 and county land for a new location. We have the approval of the Finance Committee and are looking to get an okay from the county commissioners in 2 weeks. Thank you for all you do. The next message I got was from Emily. She told us that the county commissioners had unanimously voted to match the donation and build the shelter. Emily wrote, Thank you for visiting the impoverished shelter, spreading your word through advocacy, and teaching Becky and myself how to be better public government advocates. Your words in your article held a lot of weight. It is because of people like you and conversations that you start that make dreams like this a reality. I applaud you for your efforts. We are so excited for Franklin County and hope their story and the leadership of people like Emily and Becky inspires others to fight for the animals in their own communities. This is why we travel and tell these stories. I know we can do better in this country. The animals in our communities belong to all of us, and we have a responsibility to care for them humanely and find a home for every adoptable dog. I believe we can do that. And so does Franklin County, Tennessee. Together, we can let the dogs out.